So the Trump administration has demonstrated serious interest in dismantling the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. On Friday, he actually signed a directive ordering the review of financial industry regulations that are actually known as the Dodd-Frank Act. So that really just goes to show you how much on the side of the big banks he really is, and not really on the side of the average American. He had initially said that he was going to protect the average American, the average worker, but right now with him wanting to scale back on a regulation that actually aims to protect the consumer against big banks, just shows you how much of a fraud he really is. He didn't really means any of what he says, that he's going to protect the average worker. We know from the very recent history that the financial crash was actually caused by big banks making very high risk loans to individuals who just couldn't afford it, and they actually pushed these loans to these individuals by telling them they can refinance and whatnot. But ultimately, it was a way to just make big, quick money really fast via fees for repackaging these high risk loans and sending them out. And so the Dodd-Frank Act actually aimed at ending some of these practices, or at least seriously limiting these types of practices by big banks, by going into these types of high risk investing and high risk trading via high risk loans. And so, although the Dodd-Frank Act didn't really go as far as the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 that actually separated the investment banking from commercial banking, that was probably the best thing to do to actually really prevent another catastrophe like this to happen again. While it didn't go as far as the Glass-Steagall Act did, which was of course repealed by the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act under President Bill Clinton, although he did get it through largely by Republican support, and actually Republicans wrote the law. But nonetheless, it was still under the Clinton administration, which of course shows you how the establishment Democrats are not really on the side of the consumer either. But that's another story for another time. By him scaling back on this, it really shows you that he's actually not going to keep his word on that he's trying to be on the side of the consumer. He's actually mentioned even before that he wants to introduce the Glass-Steagall Act again, but right now all he's actually talking about is just dismantling the Dodd-Frank Act and nothing else. I mean, the Dodd-Frank actually also helps in ending too big to fail. It actually does end too big to fail by having resolution authority on the giving resolution authority to the regulators on failing financial institutions. What that means is pretty much that it's like a big bankruptcy process on the failing financial institutions that most likely engaged in high risk trading, but this time it does it in a way where it doesn't actually reward the executives and the creditors of these banks, but it doesn't reward their high risk trading and their high risk banking practices that are very
predatory.
That are very predatory, but that are also very susceptible to failing. So it has those provisions that actually protect the taxpayer from doing another bailout on these failing institutions that engage in high risk trading activity. So that's just another example of how Trump is actually going back on his word. Part of what he signed also is he's halting an implementation of a rule that requires financial advisors to actually act on the interest of his clients rather than on the interest of making money. And so that's called what was that called again?
The fiduciary rule.
That's called the fiduciary rule, and he's actually scaling back on that. So he was lying when he said that he was going to favor the average American worker. He right now he's actually favoring in those actions. He's actually favoring the big banks that got us into the big economic crisis in the first place. And besides getting us in a big economic crisis, we know that we, the taxpayers, actually saved a lot of these big banks from failing, these so-called too big to fail banks, and we saved them with our own money. And so by ending Dodd-Frank, it actually sets us back on a path where they will fail again, even though there's already a high volatility in the markets where we can see how we may be heading back that way. But at least Dodd-Frank actually protected the taxpayer from saving those institutions that actually screwed over the average American workers and the average American homeowners. And so now, if he only scales back on these and completely dismantles it, which it seems like he's going that path, it's actually putting us back on a path to where we the taxpayer, we the American people, actually end up bailing them out once again. Because it's actually, if he completely dismantles Dodd-Frank, he's actually going to take away the resolution authority of some of the regulators to not reward risky behavior and to actually punish the executives and the creditors that actually made it possible. So again, this is only a step back in the wrong direction, and an act that will actually get us back in the path of an economic crisis that we the taxpayers are going to end up paying for.